Right.
And are you ready to start off with our first man?
I am. Let's start off with someone who is shrouded in controversy, especially since the musical Hamilton became popular. Aaron Burr.
It's also noted for the commercial for need to have milk, right?
What?
You remember that commercial? All right,
No.
it's a '90s commercial, very famous, and it's very glossy, and it's a guy who like hears a radio thing and like, you get a prize if you tell us who Hamilton killed, and he says Burr, but his mouth's full of cookies and he has no milk to wash them down, so he can't call them in, and he's surrounded by Aaron Burr related stuff everywhere. Like even like the gun that killed Hamilton is on the wall. It's ridiculous, and it was also directed by Michael Bay. It's some people consider it his finest work.
Might be. Certainly wasn't
Might be.
Transformers.
So it wasn't Transformers, although I kind of liked Pain and Gain, but whatever. Anyway, let's get into Mr. Aaron Burr. We want to do for this is for everything we want to mention the year for the election and a little bit about the background of the figure as well. So the election is for 1800. So we're not counting 1796 because Adams became president and Jefferson later became president in 1800. So we're not dealing with Thomas Jefferson losing in 1796.
Right.
Aaron Burr was a Revolutionary War officer. He fought in particular in the Canadian campaign and marched with Benedict Arnold up to Quebec City in a very, very grueling winter march through Maine. Anyway, he eventually resigned his commission. He did very well as a Revolutionary War officer, by the way. He wasn't like some military god, but he had a good record. Eventually becomes a lawyer. He's considered charming, bit of a philanderer, very good public speaker, and one of your first real political operators and quite conniving. By the way, one of my favorite things about him is people often commented on his egg-shaped head, which you can even see in the paintings. He just looks like he has an egg. But one of the things I think is really interesting about one of the things that's really interesting about Burr to me is the number of big names from this era who despise him. Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, Adams, none of them liked Aaron Burr. Nor did George Clinton, who was himself a Revolutionary War officer and very important in New York politics at that time. So
you could
those
say
are
that
few.
Burr had a chilly reception.
Yeah, not. This is one of the leading reasons why he's going to lose. Distrusted by many people, Federalists in particular. He had actually been involved in some business ventures that had already messed with Hamilton's. That's kind of where their feud started in some ways. So, if I'm not mistaken, what he tries to do is to replace Jefferson using congressional connivery. Am I correct?
Yes, he just went to Congress, and at this point, there was not a fixed way to differentiate presidential and vice presidential votes. So most of the time, because the tickets were unofficial, the votes could be divided any which ways. And Burr decided that if he could get to the congressman before anybody else, he could convince them to elect him rather than Jefferson, and then make Jefferson the VP. Which I actually think was a pretty clever ruse. Obviously failed, but there was no rule against it until he tried this, and then they decided to fix the system. But yeah, Burr was the kind of guy, if he saw a loophole, he was going right through it. He would have been a perfect lobbyist.
Oh, definitely. He also he got undone by both Hamilton and Livingston. They were the two that undid his attempts. Hamilton, of course, telling the Federalists to essentially back Jefferson. Hamilton himself saying that, Jefferson, I disagree with him on just about everything, but I also disagree with Burr on everything. And I think he said something to the effect of, I do believe that Jefferson, though, has his country's interests at heart, and he is a gentleman, and Burr is neither.
Yeah, also apparently a lot of the Burr-Hamilton feud was not ideological, and unlike what the musical says, it had nothing to do with the idea that Hamilton didn't think that Burr was honest enough or whatever. A lot of it was a banking dispute, because Hamilton had a national bank, and then Aaron Burr founded his own bank, and I think Hamilton may have also had a bank in New York. So, there were a lot of conflicting interests at play and a lot of money at stake. So a lot of this was strictly personal.
Yes, there was a personal dimension. I do think, though, he just found Burr personally just odious. And keeping in mind this, almost all the founders who we think of as like, ooh, the founders, like not the obscure ones, no matter how important they are, but the big names, none of them like Aaron Burr. That matters.
Yeah, I mean,
None
to
of
be
them.
fair, Hamilton also had a lot of detractors, but I mean, he also had some prominent allies, George Washington being the most obvious.
Of course, exactly. So he's got the support of Washington. Burr doesn't have anybody that I know of. But I mean, that doesn't mean he doesn't have any support at all. He obviously does. He just doesn't have it amongst the heavy hitters of the era. Uh, that said, his run did pioneer new forms of campaign organizing, particularly in New York itself, which was crucial to securing Jefferson's election in 1800.
Yeah.
That said, there's an old little joke that I heard one time. It's like, who won the duel between Hamilton and Burr? Who won?
Well, I think Hamilton really won, at least in terms of reputation. Then again, it helps that Hamilton was never accused of treason.
True. The answer is Thomas Jefferson won.
Oh. Well, yeah, I can see that.
On the one hand, Hamilton's dead. That is going to be a crucial reason why the Federalists will collapse. Now, whether they could have survived with him is debatable, but certainly with him gone, they lose quite a bit. At the same time, Burr is not fully politically discredited, but now, Jefferson can more easily work against him, if you will. However, because Hamilton was so widely hated, and he killed, Burr killed Jefferson. Burr killed Hamilton in Weehawken, New Jersey. One of Aaron Burr's nicknames is the Hero of Weehawken. Now that's some spite. Well, one fun thing, as you said, the conspiracy thing where Burr went west and was going to try to fight Spain and then use that to create his own separate nation in what is today Texas, essentially. Andrew Jackson was actually involved in the conspiracy, although Jackson was going to supply him with guns and troops to go fight the Spanish, not to set up a separate republic. So he's kind of being hoodwinked, if you will. Of course, that backfired, and Jefferson, in order to finish Burr off, won him tried. But then you have Chief Justice Marshall. Marshall is somebody I do like him, but I think his reputation's a little overblown. People are like, oh, he was this great legal mind and scholar, and he invented the idea of judicial review, which is whether or not that's good or bad is debatable, I think. But beyond that, Marshall was not simply some wise, even-handed man. He absolutely hates Thomas Jefferson. So he actually defends Aaron Burr and makes sure the charges are dropped, even though everybody knows Burr's guilty. But Marshall's doing this specifically because he wants to fuck with Jefferson. That's all it is. It's incredibly petty.
Right.
So what? You got any other thoughts on Aaron Burr?
One thing I find interesting about Burr is that after 1807 and all of the fuckery that went down in the West, he basically retired to a quiet life and then died, 20 or 30 years later, almost impoverished, working kind of very quietly as a lawyer in New Jersey. Which is not what you expect after the life that he led. Because not only did he have the famous duel with Hamilton, he also had a duel with Hamilton's brother-in-law at one point, too.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, Burr was a pretty hard-to-get-along-with guy, from all that I can gather. I mean, not only does everybody hate him, but he also gets himself involved in a lot of duels. Because if you fight more than one duel, it's pretty clear that you must be an asshole.
Or at least somebody willing to fight, huh? I guess you're telling me he's a man after Andrew Jackson's heart, huh?
Yeah. That being said, when I was trying to rate him, I mostly thought about his presidential campaign, which it's hard to rate because he tried to take a VP campaign and then flip it into the presidency from nothing. I mean, he's basically trying to pull off some alchemy.
It's pretty cool, I'd say.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's like, well, you know what? People thought I was going to be VP. Joke's on them. When they cast their ballot for me, they didn't know they were choosing the next president.
What a great... God, I love him. He's so entertaining.
Yeah, he's just a perfect asshole, and he's a great villain. Aaron Burr needs to be utilized more often as a villain.
Yeah, I guess he's also just so damn likable, and he has these nefarious plans, but they're not really like, how can I say, like they're not. It isn't like he has some plans of like world conquest or genocide. It's more just like, hey, I'm just trying to make it up the pole, you know?
Yeah. So it's just he wants to be the number one guy. He's basically Cataline in a way.
Yeah. Oh, dude, that reminds me. It reminds me of that quote Benjamin Disraeli, the great British Prime Minister, said when he became Prime Minister. He said, "I've reached the top of the greasy pole."
Huh.
That was a good one. I don't know. What would you? I think Burr definitely Burr didn't have as much influence on the Republican Party.
Yeah, he definitely didn't hold them back. I mean, clearly they went on to dominate the hell out of that era. So his attempted treason and all this other stuff was pretty irrelevant.
His little maneuver was very creative, and of course, eventually forced changes to avoid a similar situation.
So I guess that is a pretty big impact because now we have unified tickets rather than voting for the two offices separately.
So, what do you think for him then?
I'm actually thinking a B. His strategy was pretty damn clever.
I'll go with that. I dig that.
Yeah, I mean, it's creative, and I imagine if I had been one of the founders, and even if I had seen that loophole, I would have probably thought it would take longer for somebody to try something like that, especially against the founding father who's got the profile of Jefferson. That takes some balls.
Yeah, God. That does. Jefferson's the founder of the party, essentially.
And also, really, the first independent governor of Virginia, the writer of the Declaration of Independence. In terms of the hierarchy of founding fathers, Jefferson is a solid 2 notches above Burr.
12 notches above
Yeah,
Burr.
it's not a contest. But yet, Burr thought, fuck it, I'll just go to Congress and they'll see my viewpoint for whatever reason, I guess.
They'll dig my egghead, you know?
Yeah, so he beat Adlai Stevenson to being the first egghead to run for president.